It's now 11:04. We're going to call the meeting to order for the Construction Advisory and Appeals Board, October 14th, 2015. Before I get started, I would like to introduce the members from my left to right.
Cody Sage.
Barry Lansford.
Richard Pirtle.
Doug McKinney.
Ben Chilton.
Cody Martin.
First on the agenda, I'd like for the approval of the minutes of August 26, 2015. I hear a motion.
Motion approved.
Second.
Second.
Approved. Second on the agenda is public hearing to be held to consider the amending of the City of Longview Code of Ordinances, Chapter 73, Plumbing Code, Article 3, Section 112, to repeal the annual testing requirement for residential backflow prevention assemblies that are used solely with irrigation systems without chemical additives. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Michael Shirley for staff comment.
Thank you, Mr. Pirtle. Just to kind of give a little background as far as why we're here, seen a few stories in the paper, and over the last few years, many citizens have been receiving letters as far as the annual inspection requirement for their irrigation systems. And so through that, many people started kind of asking questions. What's the purpose of this? What's this program about? And so I just kind of want to briefly kind of talk in general about what that is and why we have that program, and then moving forward while we're discussing that. First of all, back in 2001, back before it was TCEQ, when it was the TNRCC, at that time we were mandated to have a cross connection and backflow prevention program. In the packet that you received, you got a copy of that ordinance and detailed the information in there, and that's really where the testing and annual inspection process first appeared back in 2001. That also coincided around the same time as our initial adoption of the 2000 version of the ICC code family, the International Plumbing Code. And at that time, the International Plumbing Code also had a requirement in there as far as the annual inspection across the board for backflow prevention devices. And this just kind of talks about what that program is and what the main goals are. And I won't go into all the details there. Kind of talking about what backflow is, kind of as it states, it's undesirable reversal of flow of the water in the plumbing systems. Certain plumbing systems based on hazards, that's why they require them. How does it occur? For a variety of reasons. Can either be back pressure or back siphonage. Back pressure is the reversal of normal flow in a system due to an increase in downstream pressure that is above the supply pressure. Back siphonage is the reversal of normal flow in a system caused by negative pressure or vacuum in the supply piping. Why have a program? As I stated previously, TCEQ requires that we have a program, and for communities over 5,000, they're required to have a plumbing code. They're allowed to either adopt the ICC version or another model code version. Currently, the city has adopted the 2012 version, and as I stated, that started with the 2000, then the 2003, and then more recently the 2012. And then Ordinance 3020, which was adopted in 2001. So that's kind of the back history as far as why we have a program, where the requirement for backflow devices came from, and then also the requirement for the annual inspections. The reason that it's recommended both by manufacturers and by the industry to have those inspected annually is because they are devices that have internal moving parts that wear out. So if they're not tested, you don't know whether they're working properly or not, whether or not you're having the protection that they're supposed to be providing. TCEQ's testing mandates. Big key terms with TCEQ are health hazards, And there's some discrepancy as far as back in 2001 when we adopted that. And that in the adopting ordinance, you'll read that it was a mandate by TNRCC. And so I wasn't here then, so I can't tell you what they considered as a health hazard then. It very well could have been considered a health hazard, and that changed. But the big thing is TCEQ mandates that those that are protecting against what they consider health hazards are mandated to be tested annually, and they have a whole list of things that they consider health hazards and non-health hazards. Irrigation systems with chemical additives are considered a health hazard. Thus, by TCEQ, those are mandated to have the annual inspection. Irrigation systems without chemical additives, which are traditionally what we see around here in the residential systems, those by TCEQ standards are considered non-health hazards. Therefore, TCEQ does not mandate by state law that they are required to be tested annually. It falls under the city code that was adopted in 2001, also the plumbing code. And so what we're here to discuss today, the proposed changes, the change in the language is that all backflow prevention assemblies will be tested and certified when they're installed. Those that are health hazards will be tested annually. No change there. That is in line with TCEQ mandates. But residential systems, and I'll just read the language, annual testing by a recognized backflow prevention assembly tester shall not be required for backflow prevention assemblies that are used solely with residential irrigation systems without chemical additives. So what we're proposing is to back off of that requirement, fall in line with TCEQ's minimum standards, which would not require the annual inspection, only on the residential irrigation systems without the chemical additives. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Have any questions for Mike? All right, at this point in time, I would like to open up the floor for public discussion. I've got several speaker cards here. First one here, Terry Hawkins.
Yeah, I'm Terry Hawkins. I live over on 1509 Walter Street, and my neighbors started getting these. Some of them have actually gotten their second letter to perform annual inspections, and I don't know how long it's been a city ordinance, but I figure it's been at least 20 years because my house was built in '95 and it's never been tested. I'm sure, but it does have a backflow system installed. So so I know it was required, but I guess the annual inspection either was not required back then or it wasn't enforced. But what you run into also is, when you go to test these things, if you got a backflow system, the check valves may work, but you have block valves that haven't been closed in 20 years, and then you end up having to spend $500 or $600 to replace the whole assembly just to be able to test it. And so I guess what I'm getting down to is also, from what he said, the state doesn't really consider it a health hazard. And actually, the people had written in the Longview News Journal several times going back into last year, where I think people kind of were misled into thinking it was a state requirement. And then I guess we backed off to that and saying, no, it's really just in the plumbing code. And so I guess it gets down to, is it really a health hazard? From my viewpoint, you got sprinkler systems that are really low volume. I don't know what the hazard would be. I don't know if you're really worried about ingested chemicals, but most of the sprinkler heads have some sort of seals on it, unless they're totally underwater. Then they're not going to pull back anything anyway. I don't know if you're worried about just because it's stagnant water, but like I say, the volume is so low. I think I'd be more concerned about all the water leaks we have in the main lines around the town. I drive by them all the time where water's bubbling out. I don't know how much they're drawing in dirt and all kinds of chemicals and whatever else is under the streets. But at any rate, that was my question. And somebody just handed me something, I've never seen this before, but it's the Foundation for Cross Connection Control. And it actually says in here, and I just read this, many people believe that installing a double check valve prevention assembly is sufficient to protection for irrigation systems. It says, keep in mind a double check valve should only be used to protect against non-health hazard water. So it's almost like by definition, just because we provide a double check valve, we've already said it's non-hazardous. Otherwise, you'd have to use some other kind of device like, a vacuum breaker, or there's several other kind of devices that, keep the water from being suctioned back into the main line. So I guess that's most of the things I wanted to bring up. Besides just the cost, I've seen the cost from anywhere from $100 to $300 to inspect it, and then you get into repairs because they haven't been inspected, and it seems like it's just totally random. I guess they have data, but you really don't know how many people have sprinkler systems, how many people have sprinkler systems that have backflow devices installed, and how many people have sprinkler systems that have nothing. Because I have sold houses that were built before any ordinance, and they had nothing. They didn't have a check valve. They had nothing in the system. And so you end up having to spend a bunch of money just to be able to sell the house. And also, there's nothing that I know of that prevents a person from working on their own sprinkler systems at their own house. And I've known people that have installed their own sprinkler system, and they got nothing in them. They don't have a $900 backflow regulator system in them either. So it seemed like it just doesn't seem right that you would try to start enforcing it now after all this time, and it's so erratic. You really don't have the data to show that, who has them, who doesn't have them, and if it's really a health hazard. Because it might be interesting to know if anybody has a documented case where anybody has actually gotten sick from something that was drawn in through a sprinkler system back into the main line. It'd be hard to document, but I don't know how anybody would ever, be sick from something like that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. I
Okay.
appreciate your comments very much. Next, J.W. Baker.
Good morning. I'm going to address some of the things that he had brought up about this situation. To start off, the Safe Water Drinking Act of 1974 and the 1986 and 96 amendments that were set national health-based standards. The SWDA established barriers and guard against all hazards that may occur in the act of providing clean drinking water to the public. The SWDA also granted privacy to all states, mandating that they all have codes and or regulations at least as stringent as the Safe Water Drinking Act outlined. Under the SWDA, water suppliers are only responsible for the water quality to the service connection or water meter. The SWDA also states that the water supplier is not responsible for hazards created by the consumer, which are out of the supplier's control. The consumer has the responsibility of preventing pollutants and contaminants from entering the public potable water supply. Now, the definition of a plumbing hazard is an internal or plumbing type cross connection in a consumer's potable water system with either a pollutant or a contaminant. The difference between a pollutant is only going to be a discoloration or a smell that could be introduced into the public water supply. A contaminant is the health hazard. Now, sorry. As far as the definition of a health hazard, what we need to look at is what they have found as to what is the consumer's responsibility to take care of to ensure that nothing happens to our clean drinking water. If we don't have a check valve or a backflow prevention device that will allow any type of hazard, whether it be a pollutant or a contaminant, to get into the public potable water supply, that's a direct issue with the Safe Water Drinking Act. We need to also be aware that when it comes to a hazard, and we were talking about sprinklers, if there was ever a case. Well, I have one right here, 1969, Holy Cross Holy Cross College in Maryland had to cancel their football season after 83 members of their team were stricken with liver disease. Hepatitis infected children had been, and had made it a habit to play in their sprinkler systems at their facilities. They were in a rundown neighborhood outside the college. They would come play in their sprinkler systems. One day, a block or two away from there, a fire erupted. They were dispatched out, hooked up the fire trucks, started putting out the flame. It created a siphon. At the college, the sprinkler heads were below ground, as they are on everyone's, or the majority of everyone. And in fact, they were built into boxes in low-lying areas where they had pooled with water. The water was contaminated after back siphonage was created from the fire department using their pump trucks to put out fires, sucked the hepatitis-ridden water into the potable water supply. The football players and staff go into their locker room, use a drinking fountain, and 83 of 95 members of that football team contracted hepatitis A. In 1991, Southgate, Michigan, 2 homeowners reported dirty water. One homeowner noticed parasitic worms, rust, and dirt in his tub while filling it up for his children to take a bath. The health department determined that the water had backflowed through a residential irrigation system. That backflow device had hung open, was not working correctly, and created a vacuum when there was a water main break and siphoned back into the public water supply, causing, obviously, the worms to get put back into the potable water supply and distributed between the neighborhood. As far as what we're looking at, as far as herbicides and things like that may be introduced into the sprinkler systems, you have to remember that once you get past the water meter, which is the city's responsibility to provide clean drinking water to that point, it's out of their hands from now on, no matter what happens. There are unlimited amount of ways that any given person can go into their own plumbing system and or sprinkler system, irrigation system, tie onto it with whatever they want to do, add pumps to it that would override the pressure of the water supply coming to the house, which would create a back pressure issue where it would push anything. Even as far as throwing fertilizer on your yard. You fertilize your yard and you have a sprinkler system. You have a sprinkler system that holds water all the time. You don't have a backflow device on it, or it's not maintained properly and it's not working correctly. If you have a back siphonage issue, it will pull that herbicide and or any other chemical. Now I ask you, is that not a health hazard? That's our biggest question. Is it doesn't matter necessarily to what letter of the law we're trying to get to, and as we were talking about the minimum, but what is our responsibility to our customers, to our families, to make sure that they have clean drinking water, no matter what. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Okay, next is Jack Jennings.
All right, I'm not very grammatic. I'm just a dumb old country boy. Where to start? First question, Mr. Michael, has anybody gone out and looked at some of the backflows in the field? If they haven't gone out and looked at some of the backflows, shame on y'all. I'm sorry. Over 50% of the backflows, my name's Jack Jennings. I work at Eastman for 15 years doing all kind of valves, so I understand the principle. I went to school for backflows.
Thanks, sir.
Over 50% of the backflow in Longview that I have worked on or tested is full of water. Bennett's Trail, new subdivision, full of water. Fairmont Cove started in 07, full of water. One in Fairmont Cove buried 4 feet underground. Nothing but dirt and mud surrounding it. Dundee Place, backflow wouldn't work. Tear it apart, well, we have insulation, piece of plastic. The city done some work on the road area about 2 months earlier, piece of insulation plastic, flowed it into the backflow. Backflow open all the time. When I went to Sundance training, they had an article about Mansfield having the test done. I don't remember the date on the test, but they went and they took 300 meters and they took a water sample out of it. Out of the 300, 60-some% had E. coli in the water. 80-some% had fecal matter in it. You know, we got all kind of animals run across our yard, our kids, they still use the bathroom out yard, fertilizer. So if you got one dozen worker and you got one city, you got 60%, 80% of a type of health product. And we want to sit here, and I know I've talked to a lot of people in this town, and a lot of them have called their city council people, and their city council people have promised them they're going to get this change. You know, I'm sorry, but don't promise something if you don't know nothing about it. If you hadn't gone out there and look at them and understand them, you can read a lot of report, and I'm not a grammatic person, and you can sit there and read all these reports and say, yeah, this is the thing to do. If you hadn't seen some of the stuff, it's pretty bad. Almost over 50% of the valves, like I said, Bennett Trail over there, brand new valves. They hadn't been in there, 2-3 years. Valves broke off. Test cocks broke off. So you pulling water back in. It going in the public system. There's some neighbors I talked to that never gotten a letter. Creating, you know, the city kind of have created an animosity state right now that there are a lot of people next door, they never got a letter. But this person have to, this person don't. Why not? So I don't have to do mine, but you have to do yours. You know, it's something that need to be done. A question, if the city adopt the requirement to go to the minimum, there have been cities sued before because of contamination in the water. Is the city going to be responsible? Are they going to be held accountable in the sense that, you know, someone gets sick and they die, and there have been some incidents that is the city going to say, well, they go back, someone go back. You know, I'm not an attorney, thank God. I probably shoot myself. But anyway, you know, you sit there and say, hey, we ruled 5 years ago not to do this, and something happened. A health hazard happened. E. coli was just down in, I got it, down Corpus Christi, down there at Flower Bluff. E. coli went in the drinking water. They had to flood the drinking water with chlorine. Is that an extra cost for the city? Is that something they're going to have to do extra every time something happens? If they rule not to test them, then is someone going to come back and an attorney get in court and say, hey, y'all rule? It was, the state said every year, annually, just the stuff you read a while ago, annually, so now y'all decided to take that away, so it's y'all fault. Is the city going to be responsible for that? You know, and I know, and the one reason why I started doing this, and I'm sorry, plumbers, if I upset you, but one reason I started doing this is some of my neighbors, they were told $400. I had a lot of experience doing this. I went and looked at them, and so I went to school to help my neighbors out because I got a lot of older neighbors. I didn't realize it was going to cost me about $2,000 to do this, or I probably wouldn't have done it. But I did, you know, and I know plumbers have their trucks to pay for and insurance and taxes and all this stuff. I understand that. But I did it to help at a lower cost. Like I said, Flower Bluff, when they put all the extra chlorine, it costs extra money to do that. When they shut off water supply and they furnish bottled water to the neighborhood, the city paid for that. You know, there was a deal I looked up. This is just in reference on Backflow. You got them agriculture, beverage, watering, car wash, chemical plant, clinic, dairy, dental office, filming. You know, there are 35 listing here. Portable water consumer, portable water supply, and your cooling system, your heat exchanger. There's a lot of articles in there. This guy here, he is a PhD, so he got an MPH, whatever that is, a RS, and a CFSP. He said almost every place he go for an inspection, he finds some type of violation. You know, it's things you miss. You can have, when a waterborne outbreak occur, you can have devastating illness and catastrophic economic losses. This is a PhD writing this article, not me. He had worked on 4 different cases with attorney that became lawsuits, so it can happen. You know, there are a lot of people, they put back pressure from contaminated well going back in the city system. And like the gentleman said from Baker, a lot of people do their own. And I know y'all want to say that they only get checked when they install. That doesn't happen, I'm sorry. In my neighborhood, there are things that they've been put in, they never was checked when they were originally put in. So you're leaving yourself. If you have a valve that the handle break off or a test cock break off within the first year, you know, that can happen anytime. You putting everybody at risk by not checking these. And I understand that a lot of people, they don't understand, and I had a lot of people talk to me, but one thing they told us in Dallas is part of our job, part of y'all job, is to use us, to use yourself, to explain the reason why. The gentleman got up, said he didn't really know why that some people did and some people didn't. I'm sure he never heard that there was 60% fecal matter in some of them and 80-some% or vice versa, E. coli. You know, until you have an incident, you know, until you have an incident, then you can sit there and say, I made the right decision.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Jennings. Appreciate it very much.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Paul Sicario. Did I say that right?
Yeah, can I go after Don Francis?
Do what now?
Can I go after Don Francis?
Okay. Christian Ishara. Did I say that right?
Pretty close.
Okay.
Pretty close. My name is Kristen Ishihara. I am a resident of Longview at 1814 Miles Drive. I'm also the City Council representative for District 4. In my tenure as a council person, I have received more calls from constituents on this particular issue than I received about red light cameras, if that gives you any implication of how often council members hear about this, and not in a favorable way, of course. I felt that I needed to come here and advocate on their behalf. I am speaking in support of removing the annual inspection from our local plumbing code. Y'all have heard the history already today. It's no secret that the city did not look into specifically making a decision to have an annual requirement. It was essentially adopted wholesale in the 2012 International Plumbing Codes that we adopted and began enforcing later on. I wanted to reiterate how important it is at a local level that if we are considering imposing more stringent requirements on our citizens than our state does, that we look closely at that and have data to support our reasoning for requiring more of them that could be a hardship. We've heard $100 to $400 for an annual inspection. Those constituents that call me find it a hardship to make that payment each year. That is something that we need to look very closely at and be able to provide data to support if we are going to continue to require that of them when the state does not. I am no expert in backflow systems. I have one at my home, but I've never gone out to look at any. I will readily tell you that. I do think it is important to look at our history, though. For all the years that Longview has had irrigation systems, we've never had an incident. We didn't begin enforcing this annual inspection until about a couple of years ago, and we've only done it for less than 2 years, and you've already heard we've done it in a spotty fashion. We haven't required it of every homeowner that has an irrigation system here in Longview, and yet we've had no incidents of reported contaminated drinking water here in Longview. Also, the state law provides that remedy. State law still requires that we have an annual inspection for commercial owners. It requires a immediate construction inspection for those that are having a new irrigation system put in at their residence. And if there is actual or potential for actual hazardous contamination at a residence, they are required to have an annual inspection. So we still will have a program in place to provide for safe drinking water. I still don't believe, even though the comments we've heard today have alluded to it, I don't believe we have any data to support requiring more of our citizens of Longview than the state requires of them. So I'd ask you to give serious consideration to removing that annual inspection requirement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, Jack Park.
My name is Jack Park. Lived in Longview since 1959. My kids and my grandkids, most of them are still here after all these years. And I want to brag on the City of Longview Water Department. In my 56 years in Longview, I've never had contaminated water at my house, and never had any report of contaminated water, never had to boil the water. So we have a very reliable system, apparently. And this annual requirement we're talking about for irrigation systems which are non-hazardous, no chemical additives, is very expensive. I suspect, I never have gotten a quote on it, but I think we're talking about $65 a year up to $300 or $400 a year. And that's a lot of tax, or a lot of expenditures for taxpayers. And it adds up to several $1 million a year if you put the pencil to it, because you have to assume how many irrigation systems we have. But what are the taxpayers receiving in return for that, say, $2 million per year investment? I guess you could say reassurance that their system is not going to contaminate the city water supply. But that apparently is a very rare occurrence. We've had some information that maybe it has happened once or twice somewhere in America. It hasn't happened here, and it may be that we have a more stable water supply than other places. But I'd like for the committee to consider, again, that we do not exceed what the state requirements are based upon our history here in Longview. Appreciate your consideration for that.
Thank you, Mr. Park. Okay. Joe Noel? No? No? Yes.
Joe Knox, 807 Eden Drive.
Okay.
Thank you all for allowing me to speak today. I'd just like to echo what I've heard everyone else say here. For the most part, I don't think that this is something that the way that it's trying to be applied to the general populace is done in a fair way. It does appear to be a spotty type of requirement, primarily for the systems that have been placed in service probably in the past 10 years or so. The older systems, there doesn't appear to be a record of it, so those people are not getting notices. I do have another thought about an annual requirement for your inspection. If these devices are so unreliable that they would require an annual inspection, and what is the rate of occurrence of failure of them, possibly we should look at using a different device. While I am in favor of having a very safe water supply, I think at times that some regulations can go above and beyond what common sense would dictate. We all know that we don't live in a perfect world, and I feel like that the instances that we would have a problem would be very rare. I, for one, am not familiar with any instances here within the city that we have a problem. So, and also going back to the spotty notices, unless there's a way that we can present this to the general population to where it's fair for everyone, I don't think that it should just be applicable to just a select few. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knox. Okay, Kelly Green.
one of my questions was answered at when the staff individual went through the regulations. We are now required to have our residential irrigation systems evaluated for backflow at a cost of $150 annual as an average. The annual cost will put an undue burden on many in the community. The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality states, your water provider, Longview, may have adopted additional codes and regulations which require an annual test of the BPA on your irrigation system. The key word here is may. How or why did Longview administrators determine it would be conducted annually? To me, every 5 years would be more reasonable. Everyone, of course, wants clean water. How many instances of backflow at private residences have occurred in Longview? The irrigation technician that I talked to that checked my system said rarely. Will the rule of unintended consequences come into play? With increased regulation, will fewer businesses locate in Longview? I call on this board to change the regulation to 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Joe Randolph.
Thank you very much. Some of the aspects in favor of repeal of the part of the ordinance that speaks to backflow testing of residential areas without chemical additives, I am certainly for that. But I will admit also that until a few months ago, I had little knowledge of even the term backflow, quite frankly. But the more I started checking into it and talking with people that I knew, neighbors, friends, acquaintances, I found out they knew little, if anything, about it, and particularly about the so-called letter that had been mailed to several citizens in our community. And it wasn't until I received a copy of that letter from a friend of mine that will go unnamed, that I found out what a lot of this is all about. Sounds picky, but I was rather struck by the fact that this letter that went out, and apparently it's an outfit called BTI that's contracted by the city of Longview. I think they're in the records management business. They're out of Worth, Illinois, wherever that is. But it was addressed to resident, and the address. It had the name of the person that sent the letter, but no signature by that particular individual, which made me wonder about the legitimacy of this particular letter. And apparently there were other people who felt the same way, because when they received the letter, they had no intention, so I'm told, of calling the 1-800 number of BTI in Worth, Illinois. They chose instead, and I would have done the same thing, to call the city of Longview. When they called the city of Longview, they were directed to somebody in the water utilities department who, according to what I have picked up, and it's probably second or third hand, they were told abruptly that the question, do I have to do this? And they said in an abrupt manner, yes, you have to do it because the state requires it. One brave soul, at least one, said, well, what would happen to me if I didn't do this? And the reply was, well, you'd have your water cut off, and the only way you could get it cut back on would be to comply with the requirements contained in this letter, and at your expense, of course, the citizens' expense. So that's how I got introduced to it. I began looking for sources that from the city that spoke to this issue, and I could find nothing until I ran into a recently issued 2014 water quality report. And by the way, I'll echo what Jack said. I think the city of Longview does an outstanding job in terms of monitoring for sources of contamination at the three places where we get our water supply, Lake of the Pines, Sabine River, and Lake Cherokee. And they do a lot of testing, a lot of different things that are done that I'll tell you is very impressive. The only thing, and this is the first time I ever ran into something about backflow prevention, is in this document. It's general, I could read it easily, but it was quite vague in terms of what it was all about, in terms of having to require a citizen to have it inspected by a licensed irrigation individual. And so, you know, I walked away still confused. Nobody, again, that I had talked with had any problem with contamination, or were they aware of it, and nobody had received the letter until recently. One person did receive the letter, and he got to be pretty interested in the situation. Quite by accident, there was another document called Cross-Connection Control and Backflow Prevention Program issued by the city that was given to me by a friend. And there was a sticker at the bottom of it that had the name of the irrigation outfit that was obviously soliciting business, had their phone number on it, and that's fine to be enterprising about it. And it also had written by hand $90, which I presume was the charge to inspect the backflow system. All that to say, do we really have a problem? And I think this has been asked by previous speakers. And it seems like if we had a problem, and if other cities in Texas had a problem, the TCEQ would have come out mandating this kind of inspection that we're talking about today, but that hasn't come up. But my question is there not a statistically reliable sample study that could be done in this arena that could tell us whether or not there is a legitimate problem here in the city of Longview? The other thing that impacts this subject is that apparently the city of Longview had no communication plan letting people know what was coming in terms of these letters. Everybody that I've talked to was totally in the dark about it. And as Mayor Mack was quoted as saying a couple of times in the Longview News Journal, he said one of his main goals is to create more transparency between the city and the citizens of Longview. And I can think of no better place to start than with this particular issue that we're talking about today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Randolph. Okay, next is Don Francis.
Good morning. I'd like to thank the advisory board for the time to address you on the matter of backflow prevention. With protocol and introductions being established, I'd like to introduce myself as Don Francis, 4105 Burks Road, Longview, Texas. I do carry a master plumber's license with a WSPS Water Service Protection Specialist endorsement, TCEQ license on backflow prevention with a customer service inspection endorsement. And so I'm gone through the ropes and knowing what we're talking about. We've been very well versed by a number of people coming before me, and it's been very helpful. And so a lot of people have done their homework, and that's great. What we're talking about is this type of device right here. And water goes through it. It has test ports on it, shut-off valves. You've heard somebody mention about valves getting broke off and handles not working and things of that nature. But for those that might not have looked and seen what we're talking about, this is a variation of one of different manufacturers. Our city over the years has touted accountability, integrity, professionalism, and teamwork. and we've been really good about it. In the backflow situation, we've lacked in a number of areas. We've not maintained it like it should have been for a number of years when we first started requiring to put backflows in. They should have been being checked annually, and it hadn't been done. But then, as times progressed and things moved forward, we started getting involved with the program and getting things on board. Accountability to our citizens, accountability to our water system is something that's just really important. As a city and as professionals out here, we're accountable to the citizens in Longview to help protect our most precious resource, water. The integrity of our system depends on the city of Longview and the professionals out here working in it, being the irrigators, the plumbers, and all the rest that are working involved in the system in keeping our system protected. The professionals have worked hard and diligently in trying to work with the city in protecting the system and educating the system. As this program has come about in the last 3 years, we've all had our share of phone calls, with one of our city staffers probably taking the brunt of it. I'd like to just compliment Michelle Cawthorn at this time. She's done a tremendous job over the last 3 years in getting this system built up, educating the public. That's been the biggest thing, is education. And that's something we have, as been mentioned a moment ago, we struggled with educating the public on what's going on and why we're doing this. But protecting our water system is just utmost importance. As the city grows and we develop and things move forward, whether we get more industry, more subdivisions, things are going on, we've been very fortunate in Longview not to have a problem. We don't have a statistical data on bad water supply. We've been very fortunate, but it does happen around the state, and there's plenty of information out there that can be gathered to provide that. But if we don't do something to step up and protect ourselves as we grow, we're going to find ourselves with some problems. It's inevitable. It's not a time to step back and say, wait a minute, we're going to stop doing part of this. It's a time to step up and keep moving forward with this. I know people are very frustrated over the money. All of us have heard it with taking phone calls. That'll level off in time. As supply and demand works, the price will come down some, things will level off, the contractors will all get somewhere around in the same scoreboard on the fees. But as this kicked off, everybody's just kind of taking shots and running around at different numbers and making money where they can, and it's not been necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it gets a little high. Some guys are coming in and doing it pretty inexpensively, but it'll level off. Supply and demand will do that. So that's something that can be looked forward to. The price will come down, and that'll work its way out. Somebody mentioned about it being spotty, and as far as the notifications. You can't just dump 25,000 letters out in the city of Longview saying you got to get your backflow checked. It takes time to build a program. It takes momentum. It takes efforts on a lot of parts. It's taken teamwork to get this thing going and get it fired up. It is certainly something that's needed in Longview, and it's going, and it's working well. And so I'd like to see it keep going and for us not to back up. It's gone a little bit, and yes, there's a lot of streets where 2 or 3 people on the street will get a letter and the rest won't, and a year later some others do, and it's building. It's building all along. So I'd just like to encourage the council to, or the advisory committee to encourage the council to keep the momentum going. We've got a good thing going on. It's a struggle. Shoot, I'm sure when people had to start paying car insurance, they didn't like that either. But yeah, there's a fee involved. If you've got a sprinkler system, there's a little bit of maintenance involved in it, and that's just part of it. It's not a tax. It's just maintenance. Thank you.
I got a question for you.
Yes,
What's
sir.
involved in checking the valve?
There's a set of gauges that get mounted on these little test cocks.
Okay.
There's spring-loaded check valves in here.
Yes, sir.
And what you're checking is the pressure differential on either side of the check valve.
Okay.
Because the check valve, and you've got a line pressure coming in, goes past one check valve, that spring-loaded check valve is going to drop that pressure a pound or two because it's spring-loaded, and it's going to drop it a pound or two on the other one. As long as you're checking the differential on either side of that check valve and knowing that the valve is maintained closed like it's supposed to, you'll read that differential and the valve checks out good. It's not a very long process.
Okay.
The gauges cost about $1,500, so there's expense in that. And then the training, and we all get annual certification, annual continuing education. But that's what's involved in checking it. If I'd have thought just a little harder, I'd have brought a set of gauges in. But you place gauges on these test cocks and measure the differential between the check valves.
Yes, sir. All right. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Okay, James Allen.
I'm James Allen. I'm a professional sanitarian, which really try to prevent things from happening. I have worked with county as a environmental director, so I'm gonna try to not be biased, but there is a responsibility for a water company to protect drinking water. And that's what we should be. It's not about how much it costs the customer or the backflow tester, what they charge, because you can do it in-house if you like to. You can build a good program, and I speak from experience, right in-house, that you could either contract someone at a reasonable price, get $5 or $10 extra on their water bill. They chose to have 2 meters. And I believe the reason you have 2 meters is because you're protecting that customer from polluting his own self. Because if he put it on 1 meter and that water becomes contaminated, they're the first person that's going to drink it. So having 2 meters is a reason, that's a choice that they made. You buy an expensive car, it's a choice. You're going to pay a higher premium of gas. So, but there is a hazard there, and it is a responsibility. Now, if you look at the water codes, they're a little different, and they say you must protect the drinking water. And I encourage you guys not to look at all the options. I'll come and work for free and give you several options where I have brought companies, at least 3 companies, that they were in poverty level with another city, and they're probably making maybe $200,000 to $300,000 in each program. So there's a way you can do it, but you can't do it by the good old boys. And but there are contaminants that can happen. And I'll give you another thing. By having all these different licenses, I probably got 8 licenses: soil, wastewater, drinking water, installer. So, but all these cross-training, and I probably can ask the question, what is the most consumed food in America? And anybody want to take the chance and say, I know what that food is? It's got part of it in there. It is ice. Ice is the most consumed food. Of course, it's a product of water. But ice can be contaminated. So, just recently learned that we do have a aerobic system in the city limits. But I dare not to say to anybody know what, if you got a aerobic system in an irrigation, what you should do when it comes to backflow. You probably didn't know. I didn't know till a few weeks ago. You have to upgrade it to a RPC, a higher standard to protect the drinking water. That's a law. It's in 344.51. It's a law that they need to be upgraded. They need to protect the drinking water. Now you got 3. You got a well there possibly for irrigation. You got city water, and you got a aerobic system. All of them are pressure. And it don't take much for a cross-contamination in that situation. And whether you use in-house to go around and protect your water, because that's the whole key why we're here. Not you protect the water, you protect the people. Most of the time people get sick, what people probably don't know. We go to the doctor, and the reason you don't know if you get sick from water, because you don't do a stool sample or a blood test. If you did, you'd probably find out that a lot of people not only get sick, they probably die every year from waterborne illness or food-related illness. But because we use antibiotics and stuff, we want a quick fix. You have a headache, you take an aspirin. But the purpose of why do you get that headache? So there people get sick, but with my expertise, the most important thing is to protect your drinking water and you protect the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Paul Scotia.
Thank you. I'm Paul Scotia. I currently hold a master plumbing license. I have some similar training that Don Francis has. I did want to go after him because we kind of coordinated a little bit ahead of time. I didn't want to repeat ourselves. I keep hearing one thing that concerns me is what we're calling a hazard. if it's a hazard, it's a hazard, whether it's in the commercial sector or it's in the residential sector. I mean, call it what it is. If it's, I guess the old cliche is if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. But if this commercial enterprise, am I understand this correctly, we're still going to enforce it for commercial irrigation systems?
Correct.
But we're kind of picking on, we're going to let the residential people slide because they're the complaint. Is that correct? Am I right? Somebody say something? But we're going to enforce it on the commercial, but not on the residential because the residential sector is where the complaints are derived from. If I'm understanding that correctly, I kind of disagree with that mentality. If it's a hazard, it's a hazard. And I think it needs to be across the board. I heard a couple of speakers, actually that's kind of been the theme here, the calling card, do we have a problem? Do we have a problem? And that's not the question the city, I think, needs to ask. The question is, do we have the potential for a problem? And this system kind of eliminates some of that. Now, I see a lot of you testers here. I know what you guys are pulling out of the water stuff. If the people against this saw what we pulled out, see the head shaking? I'm not, even if you don't know which side of the board I'm on, if you saw what we pulled out of these devices because they failed, you might say, hey, that $100. I think I'll pay you $120. Here's a tip. And I say that kind of in jest, but it's truth. I can't tell you what all we pulled out when these things fail. You don't see this in the plumbing code. This is a hot spot on the irrigation side because the plumbing code in its design creates air brakes at every point of use. So when you have Joe Q customer who decides to, cowboy his own system in there, you have to go out of your way with basic plumbing fixture design to create a cross connection. When you open that box you get at Lowe's, Home Depot, and it says UPC approved or some of that other stuff on it, that's because the design has that air brake design in it, so you can't create the cross control. It's handled at the manufacturing level so that the customer can't mess it up. I mean, it's just, you can't do it, am I right? Okay. My next question would be, what is the direction the city of Longview wants to go with this? Do we want to be proactive or do we want to be reactive? Again, that goes back to, do we have a problem or do we have the potential for a problem? All right? That's something, that's on your end. That's above my pay grade. My next question would be more for all the homeowners that have invested a considerable amount of money. What about the progress? If this is going to happen, my question would be, what about the progress we've made to date? And I think it's going to happen. You look at, and Michelle, I think you've got some of the information about the bigger cities in Dallas that have some of this stuff. I'm not calling you out, but there's a lot of the cities in the Metroplex, they've had this adopted for some time. If that's the direction that municipalities are headed, the last thing I think we need to do is put the brakes on it and say, hey, wait a minute, let's check this. Let's hold off on that, because if you think the fallout from it now was bad, you put a stop on it, and you think communication now was bad, you put a stop on it for a couple of years and then try to re-energize the machinery again 3 years from now. Holy moly. I don't want to answer that. I don't want to hear any more of those customers calling up saying, oh, this is a tax on the... I'm not playing around when I say, by more than one time, I had elderly women call up saying, this is a tax on the elderly. And I said, no, ma'am, I assure you. Check, check. Can you hear me in the back? I actually had some people say, this is a tax on the elderly. It's not a tax on the elderly. And I tell them, ma'am, I assure you, it's not a tax on the elderly. This is a tax, if on anything, it's because you have an irrigation system. That's all it is. Next point. And this is another city question. How is the city going to respond if we do put the brakes on this? And now we've already had only about 20,000 customers buy into this. What are they going to say whenever we say, we're not going to do this anymore? Can I have my money back? What is the fallout from that? And I don't know. I can't answer that. But that's just going to create, somebody's phone's going to start ringing downtown, I guess. I'm going to guess. Again, that's not for me to do. Why most do not have. Somebody mentioned earlier that the residential sector, some people have 2 meters, one for irrigation, one for domestic. I've been checking these valves. I know you've been checking them. You guys have been checking them for years and years and years and years. I'm not talking about last 2 years when they enforced it. There were some, believe it or not, some customers that were proactive in doing this. And so we've been checking it because they felt they needed to do it for the community's sake. It's been my experience, and I want some head shaking. Do most people have 2 meters? No. They have 1 meter, and they tee off that meter and put their backflow device in there. So I wouldn't put my eggs in that basket. Most people have 1 meter and it tees off from there. So if the system is designed and installed correctly because a licensed irrigator installed it, then you would still protect that person's drinking water from their own devices. Now, here's what I want to close with. My neighbor waters his lawn ridiculously. He mows twice a week. He walks his dog all around his lawn. I check his backflow device at no charge because I know what his dog does on his lush green grass as he's watering every day. I check his backflow device at no charge to protect me and my kids. So those of you complaining about this, you have that lawn Nazi neighbor, you might want to think about that as the dogs come out. And that's what it is. There's a device down in Austin, and you can probably YouTube this, I don't know. All of us, I'm going to say, and perhaps yourself, there's a device down in Austin. When we go down there to the State Board of Plumbing Examiners, Dennis, I know you've seen it. They have clear piping. It's all glass piping, and they inject some dye in the water, and then they start opening valves. And those valves show you exactly how that water migrates through cross connection, and it's a scary sight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Jules Soren.
Do that? No, just speak into that.
Okay, yeah, Jules Saran, 2711
Sorry, sir.
North.
Sorry, I didn't say it right. Your
No
last
problem.
name? Okay.
I'm the third and I have 4 boys, didn't name any of them Jules. Not a one of them has said thank you. 2711 Northridge. My buddy Jack came to me last fall and said, "Oh, have you got your backflow valve checked?" And I said, that was like a cow looking at a new gate. It was just like, what? So he tells me the story and how much people are charging. I said, look, what if we go to school, invest a few $1,000s and sharpen the pencil and save people money? So that was our idea. That evening, I'm driving home, and there's water rushing down the street, and it's coming from my house. My driveway is coming everywhere. I run out, turn my water off. It doesn't slow down a bit. So I've realized that siphonage idea, like when you have a canister and you put some chemical in it and spray your hose, it draws it up and out. That's what was happening if my backflow valve didn't work with my neighbors. I have an open offer for anyone here. I'll go shut my system off and drain what I've got in my sprinkler system, and you're welcome to drink it. That's an open offer. Stop me after we're finished. If you think that the neighbor's cats, dogs, my dogs, and the fertilizer that I put on that property will not affect you. Well, I want to report the TCEQ. They've they've obviously wasted a lot of people's money to print this up that says, and I'll leave this with you, you'll make a copy. I'm reading. This is from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and I'm reading, backflow prevention assemblies installed to protect against any substance that can make you sick must be tested annually. Why would they print that? And then, unlike everyone else, could I get an answer from one of y'all? Why did they print this? I'll wait. Hello? Is there an answer, Doug?
We don't have a copy of what you.
We don't have what you.
I just read it verbatim. I'll leave it with you.
Yeah, well, we'd need further
We'd have to look at it
discussion,
further, sir.
research before we would start answering questions at this time.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I think I might can answer some of that. The board's not really here to answer those questions. They're here to take the input.
I
and
thought
then
it was
make a
questions and
recommendation.
answers, no?
Well, they're a board of appointed citizens that.
That was
their
my
role-
next point. Didn't the city council put this requirement in place?
Yes, in 2001.
Then why did they turn it off on them and we don't have a meeting with the city council?
You will, and part of the Construction Advisory and Appeals Board, what they're tasked with is looking at construction-related codes and recommending changes either based on local preference or to stay in line with state or federal requirements. And so, and I don't think when they introduced themselves, they introduced why they're on the board, but many of them have a background that's related to the construction industry, whether it be contractors or plumbers or so forth. And so they're tasked with having public hearings, just like we're having today, taking that input, and then making a recommendation on what they feel is best based on that input and their expertise to send to City Council, and where City Council will ultimately make that decision on behalf of the citizens who duly elect
And
them.
there'll be a chance for input on that at that
Absolutely,
time?
there'll be another public hearing.
So this is not the be-all and end-all?
No, this is the first of 2 public hearings, and this is just for them to make a recommendation based on the public input and their area of expertise.
Okay. Let's see. Someone posited there's been no failure in the water supply as far as cross-contamination. I'm very aware of the way the flu and a variety of stomach maladies, 2- and 3-day things, goes around in groups around this city. And I don't remember being in contact with any of those other people that all of a sudden me or someone in my family or several people that I know personally have come down with this. So how can you say that it's not going through the water if that's the only connection? Couple more points. Why does the city require a backflow device installed in the first place? Can y'all answer me that? I mean, why?
We're adhering to the TCEQ requirements. We didn't think this up.
Well, now you have a copy of the TCEQ requirements on the testing. It seems odd. I don't remember, nor do I know anyone that's ever bought a washing machine or a car or a computer or anything else that didn't have to be adjusted and checked as time goes on. Seems odd to me. If safety is the goal, if that's the case. Calculus, if and only if. And I guess the other thing is the liability. So if there is a failure and if it's traced and the city pays the fine, that just means the citizens pay the fine. So the people in charge need to accept the responsibility in the event of failure. You know, 100 years ago, they'd never had a fire in Chicago. When they had the first one, it was bad. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, sir. Is there any questions for Michael or anything?
Yeah, the water, we've been talking about the water, and so what's the water department stance on this?
Yes.
I can't answer that for you,
Okay.
but what I would like to do, just real quick, and you have a copy of this from the East Texas Builders Association. They did send a letter stating their stance, and I'll just kind of enter that into the record and read a portion of that. They have discussed the possible changes of the backflow prevention with their builder member and appointed city liaison, Tom Davis. In response to the Construction Advisory and Appeals public hearing on October 14th, Mr. Davis is in favor of eliminating the annual testing. Should you decide to discontinue annual testing, he and most of our builder members individually would continue to recommend that homeowners have their backflow assemblies tested every 2 years. We appreciate your effort to inform all industry professionals that may be impacted by this change, and that they're providing all this information to all their builder members. So that's their stance, and would like to just want to enter that into the record since they're not here.
Okay.
Is he expecting an answer for us today, or can we give more time to do some more research? Are we expecting to give a complete answer today as our recommendation, or do we have some more time to do some further research since there was quite a few items brought up?
Sure. I think at your discretion, if you needed additional information or gave us direction, we could provide that to you. I wouldn't recommend tabling it, just postponing it.
Right.
If you felt there was something more that you needed, that's certainly an option.
Okay.
Because based on the history of our, if we did pass this, I mean, if we recommended that, so what we'd be recommending that we eliminate repeal this and go back to where we're not testing it?
Correct. What is before you for consideration is to amend the local plumbing code section of our Code of Ordinances to not require annual testing on the residential irrigation devices that do not have the chemical additive.
Right, and we'll be meeting all state codes by doing that.
Yes, as stated, TCEQ does not mandate the annual testing for those types of systems.
Okay.
And under the various administrative codes and so forth that also adopt the plumbing codes either through the State Board of Plumbing Examiners, it does give the city as a home rule municipality the ability to amend their ordinances to stay in line with those local considerations. And since it is staying in line with TCEQ's minimums, we're not going below that, so we are staying in line with it. We have that option.
Well, based on the history of our success of the water in Longview, Texas, and that we're passing the code, I mean, I wouldn't mind making a motion that we repeal that and go back to where the other one, as long as we're meeting the state standards and as long as the city water department is pleased, which I think I've been here 57 years like he has been, that we've never had a issue with unsafety. And so I would say that I would make a motion that we appeal it. They might want to postpone it, but I would say I would make a motion to appeal this.
Second?
I want this entered in for record's sake. Our job here is to make a recommendation for things to be approved by the city council. We've heard a lot of arguments for, we've heard a lot of arguments against, and the city council's job is to effect the changes that are in the best interest of the citizens. The statistics that we've heard haven't spoken to the likelihood of issues or the effectiveness of both the hardware or the program itself. So I don't want to discredit people like Mr. Francis, Mr. Baker, or Mr. Sarant, who was actually at my house about 3 weeks ago informing me that I needed to have my backflow device checked. I don't want to discredit your expertise in the area. But what the citizens have and where the complaint has arisen is the fact that the program that we have is dysfunctional and unstructured at best. So to move forward with our current program is simply not going to work. It's not going to help your cause, and it's not going to help the cause of the council or the citizens. So we got here because the program was enacted in somewhat of a hasty fashion to accomplish a need for the state. But what we have since learned from that point is that we're kind of adhering to a need that the state doesn't actually require. This is proven out in the fact that our program is shoddy at best. And so while I'm not overly against the program as it is, I am against it in its current structure. So what we are tasked with is recommending to the council, what do we do at this point? And at this point, until someone can offer a reason that we need to continue with a better program, then I would second the motion to repeal the law.
Okay. All in favor?
Any more discussion?
Do what now?
Is there any more discussion?
Is there any more discussion?
But we have
Well, we got
a first and a motion, so I think we need
we got
to
a first and a motion.
take a vote or let that fail
Okay.
before we have
We had a
a
first and a
discussion.
motion. All for?
I'm for.
Against. All opposed? Motion passed.
Did you get that?
Huh? You get that?
Needs to close the meeting. Richard, you need to close the meeting.
I'm sorry. Meeting's adjourned. Meeting adjourned.